G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. Today we're here to talk about a brand new lens for the Nikon Z mount. 70 to 180 f2 from Tamron for full frame. And yes, what's interesting about this lens versus the native Nikon 70 to 180 f2.8 is that this is the Gen II version. Very exciting to see. And not only that, but some people still perpetuate the myth that there are not third-party lenses for the Nikon mount. Well, from Tamron alone, this is the 9th lens for the Nikon Z mount. There is no shortage of third-party lenses, let alone a handful from Sigma. I'm sure more coming soon. Let alone the huge amount of first-party lenses from Nikon themselves, which has just about hit the 50 lens mark, and then just an ongoing enormous number of other third-party lenses, including companies like Viltrox and Lauer. No shortage, but today we're here to talk about the 70 to 180 2.8, and you might have guessed it already. Yes, we are shooting on it right now. This is my normal shooting setup. I'm normally at 50mm. This time we are at 70mm. The camera is just shy of a meter, just over 2 feet back from its normal position, just to account for the fact that we are at 70mm instead of 50mm, but we are at 2.8. So as you can see here, we do still get some fall off. We can get that short depth of field that a 2.8 will give you. Not the same as the normal 50mm 1.2 or 50mm 1.8 that I shoot in this position, but I'm often shooting around f2 or f2.2. So 2.8 is not a big difference. Now this is a really exciting lens for people who want those faster apertures so that they can collect more light. And whether you put this lens on an APS-C sensor or on a full frame sensor, you are still, per photo site, going to collect 2.8 of light. Now, of course, there are differences in depth of field, and in the case of the Nikon APS-C crop, it is a 1.5 times crop. Field of view difference, it's also a 1.5 times crop when it comes to depth of field, which I think takes this lens out to 4.2 depth of field, but not how much light it can project onto a sensor. Let's just be clear about that. So you do get the 2.8 wherever you are when it comes to light. And what Tamron tell us is it is both the smallest and lightest in this category of lens, at just over 15 centimeters long, just over 6 inches, and it comes in at 865 grams or 30.5 ounces. So not only does this give you 2.8 of light gathering capability, but it's also small and light. And yes, some might say it is not a 70 to 200, and it's true, it's not. But the difference between 180 at the long end and 200mm, it's not a huge amount, and the fact that this lens is so small and so light, that differential might not make a difference to you. For example, if you're shooting on a high megapixel camera, and even these days I kind of call high megapixels anything over 24 megapixels or 24 megapixels and above, because quite frankly I started my career on 6, I made an enormous amount of money out of 12 and 14. 24 was a luxury not that long ago, and of course now we have 45 all the way up to 60. If you want, you can go there. And thus, the difference between 180 and 200mm from my perspective is not that big a deal, especially when you consider the size, weight, and of course the price differential in buying, for example, first-party lenses. Now, an interesting conundrum here, and I don't own this lens, of course there is the native Nikon 70 to 180 2.8 that I think came out about a year and a half ago, something like that. We believe that that original Z 70 to 180 probably does have a fair bit of Tamron DNA in it. This is the Gen II though, and we believe that one is the Gen I. I'm hoping in an upcoming episode that I can test these two lenses side by side. I just have to get my hands on it. We'll see how we go there.
1/25 2.8 ISO 64. We're 20 minutes after sunset. We are at 70, and you can see how There's no focus breathing or minimal with a realistic distance change.
Now, one thing I've observed by shooting with this is, now this lens is brand new. It's only been in the market, I would say, a week or two, something like that. I'm not even sure that it's shipping yet. It probably is. But I think there's a little bit of work that Nikon need to do with Tamron between the VR in the lens and the VR in the camera. I think they're both working towards the same outcome, but they're not working together like we're used to with pretty much every other lens that has stabilization in the lens and stabilization in the camera. Just something they've got to iron out. Of course, that will come in firmware, whether that's on the Tamron side or the Nikon side.
What we can see here is the Z8 at the 2.3 times crop, which is getting us out over 400 millimeters. This is where it's most obvious. And now we're on the ZR. This is at 1.4 times crop, going back to 1.0. Really, those jitters are most obvious when we have these digital zooms. For stills, there seems to be no major impact. Video, I would say a little bit of tweaking needs to be done. It does have very fast focus motors, which to me are pretty much on par with most of what the industry and Nikon are doing today. Let's keep in mind this is seemingly exactly the same lens that has been released for the E-mount. E-mount users are very happy with their 70-180 2.8 Gen II. And, well, I feel very happy as well. I haven't had the chance to test that one, but I will as well. At 70 millimeters, which is actually quite long, the minimum focus distance on this lens is around 30 centimeters or 11.5 or so inches. When we get out to 180 mils, it's 0.85 or 85 centimeters and getting up towards 3 feet. This actually allows this lens, and look, it's not a macro, but it allows it to do some pretty close-up photography, which is pretty cool. This is something that Tamron seem to do with all of their super zooms. They give you the best of both worlds. It has 9 aperture blades, which gives us a pretty good look in the background out of focus areas and our bokeh balls. And the filter size is only 67 millimeters, which is really giving you a sense of how petite and light this lens is. There are 20 elements in this lens across 15 groups. And of course, which is really exciting if you're into the Tamron range, this completes the trinity of 2.8 zooms, and it is now giving you 16 millimeters all the way out to 180 across those 3 lenses at 2.8. And this does use Tamron's lens utility software, which allows you to customize all sorts of aspects of this lens. Here you are having a very good look at it as a talking head or a portrait lens. 70mm, 2.8. I've left the camera position the same so you get a feeling of the difference between 50mm 2.8 and 70mm 2.8. Here it is in the hand. We'll take that lens hood off. And yes, it's still getting up towards a kilogram at that 860 odd grams, 865 grams. It's got some weight to it, but you need to collect 2.8 of light, you have to have a fair bit of glass in there. And of course, it's a zoom. Now, something that some people may or may not be into is, of course, it is a telescoping zoom, as we can see here. It has a lovely, gentle mechanism. It's quite a small telescope. If telescoping is something that you worry about, you can click the lock switch and that stops it from telescoping, which is great. Telescoping does allow you to create a shorter lens, and this is just over 15 centimeters or around 6 inches, which is really impressive. We do have the zoom ring, nice and smooth, well dampened. We have a focus and programmable ring, a function button on this side, just with the one 3-positioned switch here, which allows us to program various different things. Of course, a metal mount, as we always do from Tamron. And then finally, we do have the USB-C port. Now, I have over recent times learnt that these can be weather sealed. I suppose what that means is when you're not using the port, it isn't active. Whether that's the case for these or not, I'm not sure. As I've said in the past, I don't mind the fact that some manufacturers put the USB-C ports here in the actual mount, because then it's behind the weather sealing. Now, there is weather sealing, and of course, Tamron weather seal their lenses quite well. I've never really put them through the hardest of tests. It's a great lens. It feels good. It's well made. We have composites here. There is no other way to make products lighter and lighter unless there is more usage of composites. And to me, it's quite interesting. There is still this perpetuation of the idea that composite-based lenses are lesser than their metal brethren. This is something that I deeply disagree with. Composites have the capacity to be stronger. We know, for example, when it comes to carbon fiber, it is 7 times stronger than steel. Now, is this carbon fiber? No, but there are so many different formulas of composites out there. These things these days are very impressive, along with the fact that the composite has the capacity to yield under pressure. In other words, it will deform and then bounce back, and thus protecting the lens. Whereas a metal lens, it won't do that. It will take the impact, you will have a dent there, and it will actually probably create more of a vibration, more of a shock through the whole system, because it doesn't essentially bounce in and out. So I just want to continue to talk about the fact that there's nothing wrong with composites as long as the manufacturers are using good ones. And let's face it, it's in their interests to use good ones. Well, let's have a little bit of a look at the 70-180 on, well, I thought it was time to pull out the big gun. So what I have here is the Z9. It's been a while since this little guy's appeared in a video. And of course, a Z9 is a great place where you might want to use a 70-180 2.8. Now, of course, because the Z9 is a robust camera, this lens is absolutely very, very relaxed on the front of the Z9. No problem at all. And yes, autofocus is very quick between objects, and it is not parfocal, but it's so quick at adjusting that it's not a problem. And it is extremely stable. Wow, that is not moving.
We are on the Tamron 70-180 f2 for Z mount, shooting on the Z8, although this image is cropped because there was a car and I just really didn't like it. What I like here is what we can see in regards to fall off behind the subject, along with the fact that if we go to pixel for pixel, 100%, how sharp is this lens? Now we are at 1,250th of a second, probably freezing the action, and we also get a sense of sharpness here on the fence. It's pretty sharp. Look, this is not an S-class lens, and it's not giving us S-class level performance. It's sharp for what it is. Color rendition, fall off, from my perspective, looks great. We are wide open at 2.8 ISO 64 at the full 180mm. This image allows us to see, for example, we do get a little bit of vignetting. Now, obviously, I'm pushing this quite hard to get this outcome, and vignetting is very easy to fix, but it is something that's there. We have the foreground areas out of focus, background areas sharp, in focus at 100%. What I suppose would be a mix of atmospheric haze. This is something like 10 kilometers from me, the city of Melbourne, from where I'm standing. And if we look here pixel for pixel at the AMP and the Meriton logo, they look pretty good from my perspective. I'm pretty happy. This pier, I think it is bending upwards ever so slightly, and thus I don't think there's any corrections coming through for this lens at this point in time in Capture 1. So maybe there's the just absolutely slightest amount of distortion. Maybe. I don't think it's the pier. I think the pier does not bend that way, and we don't need to worry about distortion too much. Of course, that, like vignetting and like fringing, very easily fixed in post. When it comes to fringing, we can see just the smallest amount of it in here. It exists. I don't think it's something to worry about in this day and age. When it comes to absolute sharpness with this lens, I do think that contrast, or some people call it micro contrast, I do think it doesn't have the same levels that we might see in, say, S-class lenses. But of course, if you play around with contrast or your blacks, you can obviously bring that up a little bit. But it's something to think about, that natively this lens does not have that ultimate S-class contrast and sharpness, and those two things can be a little bit intertwined or slash confused because they both help each other out. But you sort of see it here where there's not a lot of clear black, and some lenses would just give you more of a sense of sharpness. Now the focus point in this image is out here on this boat, and I suppose again this idea of sharpness, contrast, this is quite interesting. This is looking quite sharp to my eye out there. It's not a bad result. Now I have increased contrast just a little bit. We'll bring that exposure down, bring that down. This will probably look better in black and white. Again, we're shooting wide open. This is 2.8 on this lens, and we are at 70 mil. You get a sense of what the foreground out of focus areas look like here when it comes to this wall. Make it black and white and move our black point around a little bit, and you can make it seem more contrasty, sharper, whichever way you want to determine it. And we can see there's some rays in the sky, and one great way to get those sorts of things to show is, for example, DxO's Nik collection. It's really good at bringing those sorts of things out because that is your micro contrast. Clarity might help us. Yeah, clarity's helping a little bit with that. Well, that horizon's looking very straight to me. Yeah, that horizon's looking straight. Maybe there is no distortion. Maybe it's actually my glasses. It's something to keep in mind that if your glasses, depending on your angle looking at your screen, can create a little bit of curvature because I'm actually looking down a little bit. My monitor could be an inch or two higher. Like that image, good result. I think this is a really solid rendering from this lens. Handheld 1/250th f2.8 at 180. Focus is on the buildings in the background, probably around this area here. Even so, this is only like, I don't know, 400 meters. This is probably something like 2 kilometers, and then these are something like 7 or 8 kilometers. And yet this is what happens with compression. It all looks pretty much in focus except for these rocks that are probably 200 meters and this fence, which is like 50, 70 meters, something like that. But I do think this really shows the resolving power of this lens in good light. Got enough of a shutter speed to keep it stable. I think this is a great result, and you get that sense of depth, good color rendition, working well. Love this image because this is the sun. It has set, and this is how it was actually glowing. This is what's going on. Focus was out here on the horizon. This is pixel for pixel. I think that turned out really, really nicely. The Bokeh balls, we can see in the middle there, brown, slightly lemony, and certainly they get way more lemony as we go towards the edges. As I pretty much say every time, I am happy for Bokeh to be different with every single lens. I don't really mind what it does. Does it get soapy? Does it get lemony? Is it perfect? I suppose there are some really displeasing ones, but most medium to high-end lenses give you great character. We can really get a sense of that out of focus area, which I think is looking quite soft, and that transition along the banister there is looking quite beautiful. A sense of what we can get away with handheld. This is 1/8 of a second, 2.8 at 161 mils. I think that's about my limit. There's some shots coming up at 1/4 of a second. They're not sharp, unfortunately, because it's quite a good shot. This is where it's at the moment. I do think a little bit more work can be done with the stabilization in this lens versus the Z8. This is almost half a second, and we can definitely see we've got camera shake here. Then we go up to 1/4 of a second, and it's almost there, but if we go into 100%, we can definitely see movement going on here. So 1/4 of a second didn't cut it. 1/8 of a second probably would have cut it. Love this frame. This is a great shot. I'll have to come back and take it again. Probably with the Plena, actually. The Plena 135 would do this really, really well, and at 1.8, be quite interesting. This one is at 1/4 of a second, and it almost is holding together, so sometimes you can get lucky. There's just a little tiny bit of movement there, and some daytime images. 1/4000th of a second. Just love the mood, love the color. Pixel for pixel, we can see that that's pretty sharp enough. Looks good for this level of lens. Of course, you can buy the Nikon S-Class version, but it's something like, depending on what day it is, what sales are going on, something like 1.5 to 2 times the price.
What I can see from the Sony version, that the price has already dropped significantly on that lens. I think the same will happen here in Australia, less so in the US. I think we do have bigger pricing fluctuations here in Australia than you see in the USA. And that's because I think our prices start higher here. Basically, there's a bit of a tax because we're such a small country comparatively. And look, that makes sense. There's 25, 26 million of us, maybe 27 at this point. I think the 70 to 180 is a fantastic choice. and I will in a follow-up video compare it with the Nikon 70-180 f2. Just have to get my hands on that lens, hopefully sooner rather than later. They're both great options, and well, you just have to look at the price difference at the moment. The price difference is around $1,000, give or take any sales that are going on and so on. Let's keep in mind, of course, the Nikon lens has been in the market a year or two. This one, well, it's brand new. If you are interested in getting the latest and greatest tech from Tamron, no question, this is it, and it does give you 2.8 of light gathering capability at that 70-180 focal length. The trinity of lenses is very, very popular, so there's no question in my mind that this will be another popular option without paying for Nikon's 70-200 2.8, which I suspect this lies in between the 70-180 Gen 1 and the 70-200 2.8. Now, of course, we did have Nikon releasing their 24-70 2.8 version 2 recently, and there was some speculation that we would have a Gen 2 70-200 2.8 from Nikon. I think that's fair speculation. My guess is if it's coming, it's probably still 3 to 6 months away to give this lens a chance to get some market share. And based on the pricing that we saw with the 24-70 2.8, I think the price will be hefty. So there will be a big difference. It might be 4,000 to 5,000 Australian dollars, whereas this is right now around 2.5, but I would see that price dropping soon enough. All right, everybody, I'd love to know in the comments below, what do you think of the Tamron 70-180 2.8 Gen 2 for Z mount, or for E mount for that matter, if you happen to own that one. Tell us what you think. It's been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here, I'd love to see you again, so please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.